What is going on, everybody? In this video, we're providing you a state of the market and stock picks for March 16th, 2023. So that sounds like something you're interested in. Consider subscribing, as we do provide daily and weekly updates to get you prepared for the day and the week ahead in this glorious market. Now, today was another very, very interesting day. Yes, PPI came in good, but ultimately, something I talked about even going into the core yesterday, inflation, I think, is at a turning point. The fact it came in at 6.6 yesterday led me to start digging a little deeper about specific things. And I started looking at something very specifically, especially because of all the bank failing, right? After the SVB failure, what I started looking at was, okay, bank runs. Obviously, we've had some bank runs. A lot of people are shifting their monies, their finances into bigger banks. Chase had a huge influx of money. Um, Citigroup as well had a huge influx of money. And then today, you had Credit Suisse, which is another foreign bank, a Swiss bank that essentially it started having the same issues that SVB did. A lot of people withdrawing money again now. Credit Suisse is really been doing bad over the past couple of years. It's not really the greatest, but understanding that it started going under, there started being more bank runs in Europe, and the problem with that being is that um, you have to understand tomorrow ECB is going to essentially announce their interest rates, and they're aiming for, are they projecting another 25-point increase. And with all the bank runs that were going on today, another 25. You have to understand with ECB, they were essentially kind of late to the game, but you have to understand that they started increasing rates at a rapid pace as well compared to where they were coming from. They went a decade without increasing rates. Then all of a sudden they start accelerating and doing all these rate increases. So the last time they did this, essentially the European markets died, right? That essentially influences our market. And essentially what happens is it will happen in Europe and then it will turn around and happen to us. And so tomorrow, if they get another 25-point increase with everybody already doing bank runs and being afraid, it's going to be a huge issue. Now, just the other day as well, I was hearing a lot of really suspicious activity coming from Wells Fargo, that people weren't getting paid, and Wells Fargo reaching out. I don't know how true this is, but Wells Fargo reaching out saying, no, we paid you. And so there was a lot of issues, a lot of rumors floating around about Wells Fargo. Again, all banks are walking on eggshells. This is something I want to emphasize, that I have shifted focus onto essentially this bank crisis that we got going on. Now, you know, Credit Suisse essentially is getting a backstop as well in case it is needed. Just like a lot of the banks that we currently have right now have essentially a backstop if needed. The thing is to emphasize here is that a lot of banks typically right now, when a backstop is essentially announced, right? It's the first backstop doesn't typically work. Normally it breaks, and then especially with the amount of the debt that a lot of these banks are carrying over, and what we saw with SVB is essentially that with the fast increase of rates, that this has put a lot of these banks and is definitely going to be checking and making sure that risk managers are essentially doing their job. Excuse me. That if they are not, that these fast rates are essentially going to put them underwater. That's what happened to SVB. It's not the last one and only one, but nonetheless, it led me into thinking. My thesis has shifted. Now this is a bank crisis. This is no longer a war against inflation. Inflation is still coming down to an extent, and I think there could be a very big accelerator here to disinflation. Now, I didn't agree with disinflation before, but I started looking deeper at this, and we can get some major disinflation if a bank failure leads to a contraction in the money supply, i.e., the total amount of money in circulation, it can contribute to disinflation. This can happen if a failed bank was a major lender and its failure leads to a reduction in credit availability, which in turn can lead to decreased spending and economic activity. So you think about it, if we get a huge bank, we have a lot of banks that are essentially turning over and folding over and failing, especially in Europe. Europe, you're going to see it a lot more, and then you're going to see it in more of our banks. If that starts to happen, you have to understand a lot of these banks, a lot of these bigger institutions, they have billions of trillions of dollars. And, that whole thing about you're too big to fail. We're seeing that that's not the case, right? SVP, even though they've made mistakes, but you have to understand that a lot of them are coming off of where they didn't have to hold assets during the pandemic. So a lot of them are in a very, very bad position. And then rates got accelerated very, very quickly. And the question is, if you didn't have your books in order, you were pretty much underwater. And the thing is that this can be hidden, so the general public doesn't know unless you bring this debt or this debt you carry over to the market, and they realize that you'd actually be underwater. But it's something, I believe it's a policy that if it's not essentially exposed, if it's not brought to the market, no one's aware of it. So you could be well underwater and no one knows about it. This is how SVP essentially got as far as it did because of the fact that right, they didn't have a risk manager their lead risk manager essentially was gone for a year. But you have to also understand there are teams of risk managers, right? But there was essentially a main lead that just didn't have a lead. Nonetheless, they knew back in December, they started to see that they were going underwater. Again, a lot of these different bonds and stuff that they bought are 10-year bonds, they have to hold to maturity. So there's a lot of different discussions about changing policy and everything. But nonetheless, what is happening here is this is now turned into a bank crisis. Thing is what is going to happen with Powell next week is the big question. Now, it's essentially come down to either it's highly pushing towards going to a pause to potentially see if inflation continues to start coming down, or maybe doing a 25-point basis move and then pausing. There's a lot of different scenarios, but it's essentially either a pause or a 25-point basis move. And until next Wednesday, we have to go another weekend. You have to understand that rates haven't come down. Rates are still at where they're at, right? And so being said, if another 25-point basis move is tacked on, how much more damage is that going to cause for the banks, right? I think a lot of them, and you saw Wells Fargo even last night, something I was talking about. Not only were they doing that, but they had a huge shelf offer as well the other day. I think just trying to get more cash so they're not underwater. Now, who's to say that none of these other banks are doing the same thing and you're just not aware of it? And so, again, I understand, yes, banks will be backed by Big Brother, whatever the case is, but there is way too many banks and there's way too much money for that to happen. In my opinion, they're going to be very selective in the banks that actually help in make sure that your number ones like JPM, Citigroup, those ones are okay. And then, if the rest of them fail, the rest of them fail, right? They'll help out a little bit, but I don't think you're going to see them back the number one bank. And this is also why everybody ran into Chase because of what was going on these bank runs. But now you got a global bank run that is currently going on. Today, even the Credit Suisse thing was kind of just, it was major news is coming out like every hour. And so it was just Wednesday, right? And this all happened last Thursday. And so going into tomorrow, we're going to have to see. Overnight sessions have been pretty deadly lately because a lot of news is kind of dropped. There's some really important news is dropped in the middle of the night, and then that's causing cascading effects. So you have to be very mindful of that and moving forward. And if this does play out, and if our disinflation comes from a break, and something I talked about a lot last night was my first check mark has been checked. We have the catalyst that would potentially drop us even more. The question is when is that going to unfold? You're seeing a lot of it overseas. It's accelerated because there's a lot more money in the system. And so we see, right, the dollar exploded up, but then the market reversed today, as you can see here, which is quite interesting. We sold off this morning, and then we just reversed right back to close to yesterday. So we'll see what happens there. But the market is really resilient. That's something you have to really point out too. But we are in a you're in a bank crisis, right? It would not surprise me if we open up and this thing is down 100 points because of something going belly up, and then more bank runs continue to happen and happen. You have to understand what's going to happen is this is going to start affecting businesses, and you're going to start seeing that's going to be reflected in earnings statements, the next earnings statements, and what's going on. And so that could it's going to affect growth, period. Right. And this is how you get this disinflation as well, is that payments can't go through, right? Like it's almost as if Powell purposely did these fast rate increases so that this would happen. But nonetheless, we shall see. At this point, again, inflation, surprisingly for me, it came down. It continued to drop. So we'll see. We'll continue to see what happens. I don't think we're out of the woods with inflation. It'll get sticky again at some point. But right now, it's good to see it drop down to 6 and stay lower. But we'll see. We'll continue to watch that and monitor that. But again, my focus is now shifted to the bank crisis, and that if this potentially is an accelerator and banks start going under, this could potentially lead to disinflation, which could potentially lead to an actual, what I would consider an actual pivot. I think is could potentially happen. So maybe the bottom was in November. It could have been. I pointed it out when it happened. But the question is we didn't know. You don't know it's a bottom until it passes. But we are down lower. I think we could still go lower. That black swan still could play out. Just be mindful of that, right? And understand that you got a bank crisis on your hands. This didn't end well in 2008. So just be mindful of that. So nonetheless, let's look at some technicals. So like I said, today we fell pretty low down to 38, and then we kind of just straight popped back up. My question is do we end up hitting this and turning over tomorrow? You have to also understand here too, this red line, the red dotted line is options expiration week. It's normally falls in the middle of the month. And so we are facing that. So you could get some added sell pressure. So if we get another bank on Thursday, this is my thing too. I think if it's going to be another bank in the US, they're going to announce it as close to the weekend as possible so that way it doesn't get carried away and they can address it over the weekend as the market is closed. I think it's a strong possibility. Again, maybe tinfoil hat, but I think it could be a very strong possibility. Again, the administration is trying to monitor the situation and trying to control the news that is being dropped. So if somebody says, okay, well, I think we're going belly up, we're underwater. Okay, well, let's not announce that now. Let's announce it maybe on, Thursday or on Friday, and then we can take it into the weekend and we can readdress it, reassess it. That way the market is not open. I can see them trying to control how some of these potential banks are going out so that we don't actually get any more bank runs. But again, we will see. We are in a different market sentiment right now. So tomorrow, if we get above essentially the 3,900, we could again potentially run up to the 3,952 for a retest. We did break retest Was looking for the dump there. We got a mini dump here, and then kind of picked it back up. PPI and the inflation yesterday, plus the possibility of a pause. You may get a little bit of a bull rally out of that. I think it could be actually a potential pivot. In my opinion, I think we're close to very much a pivot. The thing is, again, is the market is shifted. The focus isn't on what it's been on over the past couple months. It's now so something is broken. The banks are broken. What happens next with the banks? Again, if the banks start getting really bad, it could cause to a huge sell off. And at that point, that would be true bottom, in my opinion. But it still has to play out. And we're seeing that, right? And the market hasn't dropped, which is very surprisingly, it hasn't dropped. So just be mindful of that. Is trying to watch and gauge the strength that the market is currently dealing with, and then also try to see what new developments come out of all the banks right now. So that's what I'm kind of watching tomorrow. Again, wouldn't be surprised if this thing wants to try to rip back up to 4K. Its market is very weird, to be honest. We do have some positive news. We haven't really ripped out of here either, so because we're still very much waiting on Powell, and then also what's going to happen of these banks. The banks and the quick backs, the movements of the quick backstops, I think has put some people's mind at ease, but people will still shift their money. So you may still get a lot of bank runs and a lot of shifting of money. It's going to lead to more other banks essentially going under. And so it's just seeing the impact of what that is. All we're going to need is a bigger institution to go underwater, and then that's going to be a trouble, right? Like, you can only back so many banks, right? And so at some point you're going to lose one or two of these bigger banks, and then whether that's absorbed through another bank or whatever the case is. We're going to have to see. But again, if you get multiple bank failures, that's going to bring panic. Again, this is a new topic. This isn't something we've been talking about for months and months and months. Kind of just beat that whole inflation thing, beat that dead horse for a while. The dollar showed strength again today, bounced right back. Again, same like before when it was over here. It needs to break back over 105 and hold. Again, it acted really weird here because of the bank crisis. We could have potentially hit the pivot, so the market dropped out of that. So we have to see where this lands again in between zones right now. We'll see. Won't be surprised if it just holds here till we get new bank news and then potentially rips up or down. But we'll see from there. Again, I want to see a full break of the banking system for me to believe that we're going to actually pivot out of here. I think the first step is taken, but again, we have to see. Bitcoin, again, wicked right back down real quick, staying underneath that 25K. Again, we'll have to see here. I wouldn't be surprised if this rips up. I wouldn't be surprised if this drops. But to be honest, I think we have, again, more downside. We need to get through the rest of March into April. April is normally a bullish month, and then the market just kind of dies again after that and then picks up for the back half of the year. So we're just trying to get ready for that. So again, this whole bank crisis thing, it takes a while to play out. Same back in 2008, it just wasn't a quick thing. It took a couple of weeks to play out. Strong possibility. The first bank crisis hit, it took like about 3 weeks from peak to trough. And then after that, that was bottom. So just keep that in mind. This is the first week. We still haven't gotten all the way through the first week. We got 2 more weeks. We'll see what happens and what's to come. So, like I said, so we'll watch Bitcoin closely there. Tesla again, break, retest. This could be a mini pop. See if you can break past the 185. If not, this could be a rollover and start selling. Monthly, essentially the monthly resistance is kind of sitting right here, roughly at the 183. So it did get rejected hard. I could be getting a retest and then drop. So really watching that closely with Tesla. NVIDIA looks like it could be getting really strong. It needs to break over essentially the 243. Again, ChatGPT has really kind of pumped this thing because of the amount of NVIDIA chips it does use. So that does really help and back NVIDIA up quite a bit. So we're definitely have to see how that does play out there. But BA, again, looking weak. It needs to break below the 188. It does have some really good support as opposed to some of these other ones. But again, the 174 is a strong support. If it does break 174, like I talked about, you have a bigger gap or drop here. You could get down to roughly the 150. But again, we'll see. My first, like I keep talking about, my first check is checked. So at any point, I'm essentially ready to jump in the market. But now we do have a banking crisis going on, so trying to let that play out first. JPM, it's finally broken. It's held very well and actually showing a lot of weakness. So the 128 could be gap fill down to the 119. So really watching that on for JPM tomorrow. Goldman Sachs absolutely getting tore up. So this is actually a good sign because it's again taking back a lot of these parabolic moves. This particular move, which I was concerned about. So we're gonna have to see how much more Goldman Sachs can sell. There's still some meat on the bone on JPM. Bank of America absolutely obliterated and just continues to sell. So we'll see. Like I said, if one of these fold, Bank of America, I believe, is the number 2 bank, and JPM is number 1. If it does break, you got JPM, Bank of America, and then Wells Fargo. So if one of those breaks, it could lead to some major selling. So we're definitely going to have to watch that situation very closely. But if you've made this far, I don't want to make this one too long. Again, we're still waiting on news. I'm watching news daily, just really kind of see what's going on with those and then take it from there. So if you made this far, I appreciate you. Go ahead and drop a thumbs up. Until next video, I'll see you guys on the next one.